Hello, my name is Tomasz Tchórz, and in this material I would like to present you my philosophy of defending. At the beginning of this presentation, I want to emphasize that I enjoy defending in various structures, often adapting them to the opponent's style of play. This means that as a coach, I focus more on the strategic dimension when preparing the team for defending during the training process. Although I prefer to regain possession of the ball in different structures, at the end of this presentation I will introduce one that I particularly favor. I will also explain the reasons why I most frequently use it. Now, I will show you examples of structures in which my team defends throughout the season, and then I will discuss the factors that I consider when preparing the team for defending. In this material, I refer to them as the components of choosing the defensive approach. The first element I consider is the height at which I want my team to regain possession of the ball. One must ask the question, will we aim to recover the ball high up the pitch, on the opponent's half, close to their penalty area, or will we decide to allow the opponent some progression and begin our actions in the middle zone, positioning our midfield line around the halfway line? When competing against a team of significantly higher football quality, we may conclude that it's best to focus on defending in a low block, that is, in areas surrounding our own penalty area. I believe it's essential for a team to be capable of defending effectively in each of these zones, regardless of whether we regularly choose to use one specific strategy. The flow of the game changes, as does the dynamics and dominance of one of the teams. Therefore, it's crucial for the team to understand the principles of operating in each zone and to be able to adapt effectively at any moment, regardless of the scenario that unfolds during the match. A complete defensive skill set is complemented by equipping the team with the ability to regain possession after the opponent's goal kick. Although this aspect is part of set pieces, I consider it alongside strategies for operating at different heights of the pitch. I justify this approach by the speed with which the ball is put into play and the vast distance that separates the area where the ball is located from our penalty area. More and more coaches believe that a football match is played in the space between the penalty areas, ours and the opponent's. This assertion holds true, which means that the team must be taught how to effectively defend its penalty area. I will address this further in the presentation. When preparing the team to regain possession after the opponent restarts play with a goal kick, I keep in mind that the offside rule doesn't apply until the opponent touches the ball. If the opponent has a goalkeeper capable of delivering the ball over long distances, it's necessary to consider how to control the opposing forwards who remain on our own half of the field.
Jamendo.com.
Moving on to actions in the height block, I emphasize to the players the importance of maintaining close distances between the lines. I have established a limit of 13 meters as the maximum distance that can separate individual players. This approach helps reduce the effective playing space for the team and prevents the opponent from exploiting gaps within our structure. I allow for the possibility of the opponent making one pass into the interior of our structure. When this occurs, my players are expected to react by immediately increasing their defensive aggression. Their goal is to regain possession without allowing the opponent to complete another pass. In analyzing the game, I track the number of instances where the opponent has successfully made 2 passes within our structure, and I aim to reduce this number in subsequent matches. It's difficult and sometimes impossible to teach players to accurately identify the height of a given zone on the pitch. Therefore, I have adopted a principle where players are guided by specific lines that help them position themselves correctly. In the high block, the key line is the halfway line, where the defenders position themselves. The midfielders should stay 2 or 3 steps above the top line of the center circle, and the positioning of the forwards is coordinated by their partners in the central zone.
Jamendo.com.
In the middle block, the midfield line uses the halfway line as a reference point. The forwards and defenders try to position themselves about 4 or 5 steps ahead and behind the upper and lower lines of the center circle. In the low block, the defensive line balances on the arc of the penalty area, while the forwards position themselves on the lower line of the center circle. Another element I consider when developing the team's defensive approach is the opponent's structure. I analyze the number of players the opponent uses in their defensive line as well as the number of central midfielders. A crucial factor for me is also how the opponent's wingers position themselves, whether they prefer to play wide or narrow. If the opponent plays with 4 defenders and other factors align, I'm comfortable with my team defending in a structure with 2 forwards. However, if the opponent opts for 3 defenders, I usually respond by setting up my team with an equal number of forwards. I'm an advocate of aggressive pressing in the high block and appreciate when my team can press the opponent directly. Therefore, I often choose a structure with 3 forwards. My next principle concerns maintaining numerical balance in the central area of the pitch when the opponent fields 3 central midfielders. In such cases, I define a defensive structure that allows my team to have an equal number of players in that zone. If the opponent has only 2 central midfielders, my team can play with either 2 or 3 midfielders. In this scenario, I make the final decision based on other factors. The next step is to decide on how to apply pressure on the opponent. The positioning of the opponent's wingers helps me with this decision, although this is not the only factor I consider when determining which player should apply pressure. It is certainly one of the most important. Another crucial element is how deep the opponent's fullback is positioned, as this determines the distance our fullback would need to cover. When the opponent's winger tends to play closer to the central area of the pitch, I'm comfortable with our fullback applying pressure. However, if the opponent's winger holds a position close to the sideline, I suggest that another player, such as one of the central midfielders, applies the pressure. I believe it is safer for pressure to be applied by a player who makes a run that simultaneously closes off the passing lane to the center, rather than forcing the entire defensive line to make a dynamic horizontal shift, especially when the situation occurs in the high block. As coaches, we need to know where and why we want to regain possession. The choice is relatively simple, as we are dealing with 2 main areas, the wide and the central zones. However, we can combine these two areas by deciding on an asymmetric defensive approach. When discussing the choice of the zone for regaining possession, I'd like to break it down into 4 stages: pressing, chasing, squeezing, and continuation. Regardless of the chosen zone, the process of regaining possession always begins with applying pressure on the opponent's central defender. If there is an opportunity to take the ball from him, we will naturally strive to do so, but at this stage, the goal is not simply to win the ball back. I believe that it is more effective to press and delay his actions, because an overly aggressive attempt to regain possession might result in the opponent easily bypassing our player. If our aim is to regain possession in the central area of the pitch, pressure must be applied in such a way as to force the opponent to pass the ball into that zone. In this area, our player puts pressure on the opponent receiving the ball, often when he is in close position. This type of pressing, which I refer to as chasing, involves anticipating actions that will occur when the central defender still has the ball. It's an attempt to intercept the ball or close in on the opponent as he receives the pass in a closed position. My inspiration for this terminology comes from the Dutch coach Pepijn Lijnders, who differentiates between pressing and chasing attempts. The probable response of an opponent receiving the ball in a close position in the central zone is to pass it to a teammate who is not marked by our team. One of the few players who may be free from pressure is the fullback. If the fullback is positioned relatively deep, our central midfielder initiates the process of squeezing by running towards him. Simultaneously, he prevents a return pass to the player he was initially chasing by tracking the passing lane and blocking it. If his actions are effective, the process of regaining possession will be successful. However, if the opponent's fullback is more effective, our team must have a plan to continue the defensive effort. In this situation, we define the continuation of our actions.
Jamendo.com.
We anticipate 2 scenarios. In the first, the opponent's fullbacks might play a lofted pass down the line. In this case, the ball is likely to go over the head of our fullback, requiring support from our central defender, who will then engage in a duel with the opponent. In the second scenario, the opponent may escape our press by passing the ball to the central area, or the fullback might opt for a back pass, possibly to the goalkeeper. In both cases, an opponent will try to switch the play to an area where there are fewer of our players, allowing them to progress the attack. In such situations, the continuation of pressing in my defensive philosophy is the opposite of the actions at the start of the process. This means that the player who reaches the opponent receiving the ball the fastest, likely a winger or central midfielder, has the task of closing down the action in the wide area of the pitch. This type of action aligns with the asymmetric ball recovery zone in my defensive philosophy, where the initial intent was to force the opponent into the central zone, but through the continuation of our actions, we end up regaining possession in the wide corridor. The choice of the wide corridor as the area to regain possession is also frequently employed by our team. In this case, the actions of the player applying pressure force the opponent's central defender to pass the ball into the wide corridor of the field. Most often, the player who initiates the squeezing action is a winger positioned in the half space of the pitch. His previous task was to cover the half space through which the opponent's central defender might attempt to progress the ball.
Jamendo.com.
The next element I will discuss is the method of marking. The team can defend using zonal, mixed, or man-to-man marking. Zonal marking involves players' action being dependent on the position of the ball and an established hierarchy that prioritizes the importance of teammates over the opponent. Players marking zonally follow the basic principles of play, meaning that the player closest to the opponent with the ball should start applying pressure. The other players adjust their positions to cover for his teammates' actions.
Jamendo.com
In man-to-man marking, this hierarchy is reversed. Although the ball's position remains the primary reference point, players focus directly on marking their opponents. They don't adjust their actions based on their teammates, but follow the movements of their assigned opponent.
Jamendo.com
Observing the defensive approach of teams coached by Argentine manager Marcelo Bielsa, their competition against various teams, both stronger and weaker, and the results of these matches, I believe that man-to-man marking works very well against weaker opponents. However, when facing stronger teams, zonal or in the worst case mixed marking is more effective. Mixed marking, as the name suggests, is a combination of the two marking strategies. Generally, the team adopts a zonal marking approach, but some players, such as central midfielders, follow their opponents man-to-man. It's also worth mentioning the concept of structural marking. This relates to zonal marking, but overlapping structures of one team over another give the impression that the players are competing using man-to-man marking. This happens because they play very close to each other, making it difficult to find free spaces. An example of this can be seen in the central zone of the pitch when we overlay the 1-4-3-3 structure with the 1-4-2-3-1 structure. My teams more often employ zonal marking. Sometimes I deliberately adopt a certain structure to achieve the effect of structural marking. I occasionally use mixed marking when I see it makes sense. For the entire process of regaining possession to be clear to the players, they must know exactly which opponent is the one from whom we want to regain the ball and who is responsible for winning it back. If we choose the wide corridor as the recovery zone, the opponent we aim to regain possession from is the opposition's fullback. He is also the target of recovery when we apply pressure in an asymmetric setup. In matches where the central corridor is the recovery zone, my team aims to take the ball from the opponent's central midfielders. When choosing the wide corridor as the area to win back the ball, the responsibility lies with my team's winger. He is also responsible for actions related to ball recovery when we decide to execute it in the wide sector of the pitch asymmetrically. In matches where we have designed the central corridor as the ball recovery zone, the responsibility for this process falls on my central midfielders. Equally important in maintaining the clarity of the ball recovery process is identifying the moments of recovery, known in English as pressing triggers. In my defending philosophy, there are 5 such moments that signal players to start the ball recovery process. Of course, the choice of a specific trigger or several is connected with other factors, such as the selection of the ball recovery zone. At this point, however, I would like to present all of them simultaneously. The first pressing trigger is a pass towards the sideline. The second relates to a backward pass by the opponent.
Jamendo.com.
The third trigger occurs when the ball is passed inside our structure, and this is intensified by the fourth, which is when the opponent receives the ball in a closed position.
Jamendo.com.
The fifth trigger is when the opponent makes a mistake in controlling the ball within our structure. The last but equally important element in choosing the defensive approach is the movement style of the player responsible for winning back the ball. In my defensive philosophy, I distinguish between two such approaches. The first is the directing approach, which involves a circular run. The second approach is running straight towards the opponent with the ball. When we want to direct the opponent's actions to the outside or inside of our team's structure, I suggest my players adopt the circular running approach. Its advantage is the high level of influence on the direction the opponent will take with the ball. However, the drawback is the extended running distance, which results in longer execution time and less flexibility in suddenly changing the running direction.
Jamendo.com.
The second movement style is running directly towards the opponent with the ball. Its advantage is the short duration and the ability to direct actions to either side at any moment. However, the influence on the opponent with the ball in terms of specific directing is significantly lower in this case. The choice of the movement style for players mainly depends on the opponent's attacking strategy and the individual quality of players in the most sensitive positions from the perspective of the ball recovery process.
Jamendo.com.
Whether we are talking about pressing, chasing, squeezing or continuation, the key skill in each of these actions is competing in 1v1 duels. Here I would like to emphasize that I try to develop effectiveness in 1v1 defensive duels within my team using elements proposed by Polish coaches Jędrzej Wichłacz and Łukasz Baksik. They were the ones who proposed describing 1v1 competition through specific elements of this process. The first and perhaps one of the most important elements is the player's willingness to engage in a defensive duel and the desire to win the ball from the opponent. Then, following the basic principles of the game, this player should quickly close the distance between himself and the opponent carrying the ball. To avoid being outmaneuvered, it's crucial to slow down the run and transition to delay actions. Extending an arm, taking a side-on stance that directs the opponent and lowering the center of gravity are all elements that support success in a duel. It's also important for the player to take small steps, allowing him to take any action at any moment. Another key aspect is choosing the right moment to win the ball and then positioning himself between the opponent and the ball. I believe the best moment to intercept the ball is when the opponent makes a long touch, which separates the ball from him over a longer distance. At this point, the opponent loses control on the ball, putting our player in a favorable position to intercept it. My opinion on this matter was shaped by observing goalkeepers in training, who decide to engage with a forward, carrying the ball precisely at the moment when he loses control after a long touch.
Jamendo.com.
At this point, I conclude the explanation of the components I consider when determining how my team will attempt to win back the ball in a given match. Now, I will move on to describing the actions of defenders operating in a line. These actions are complex, but not particularly difficult to understand. Here I would like to mention the Italian coach Maurizio Sarri, whose materials I had the opportunity to study and develop. The key rule for my players competing in aerial duels is to ensure that the main player is provided cover on both sides of the field. In the graphic showing the coverage of a player competing in an aerial duel, we will see that the fullback on the opposite side is positioned in line with the player providing cover. In my defending philosophy, there is a rule that each subsequent player in the line should adjust his position relative to the covering partner. This is important from the perspective of further actions, as it may happen that the player competing for the ball in the air loses the duel, and the covering partner will have to engage in the next one. In this case, the only player who can provide cover on that side of the field might be the fullback that has taken the correct position in the line earlier, adjusting to the position of his partner. In the previous graphic, we discussed the coverage of a central defender, and in this one, I want to demonstrate how coverage of a fullback occurs. In my defending philosophy, defining the distance between the area where the action is taking place and our own goal is very important. I mentioned earlier that in the case of continued pressing, there might be a situation where the opponent sends the ball over the heads of our fullback, and then the covering central defender will engage in a direct duel. The fullback's goal is to return and take the place of the central defender until the action ends. However, such actions only occur if they take place far enough from our own goal that the opponent receiving the ball doesn't have a direct impact on the penalty area. That means cannot bring the ball into it. The situation is different when the action takes place close to our penalty area. Then, even if the opponent sends the ball behind the fullback's back, the central defender cannot engage in a direct duel with the opponent moving away from the goal. If the receiving player manages to control the ball and bring it into the penalty area, the returning fullback would be chasing the ball instead of attacking it from a frontal position. Therefore, in my defending philosophy, the central defender should first move towards a reference point in the penalty area, closing the angle for the opponent with the ball, and only then, if the situation requires, leave his position and move towards the opponent with the ball. In such situations, help should come from the central midfielder. However, the situation described, which prohibits the central defender from immediately leaving his position, only occurs when the ball is moved quickly from the opponent's half. In such a situation, it's not possible to use the tactic of bringing midfielders into the defensive line, which I will discuss later in the presentation. Another aspect of defenders' actions in the line is the compression and expansion of the effective playing space. In my team, there's a rule concerning open and close balls. When the opponent with the ball is under pressure, meaning he's being blocked, is facing away from our goal, or is making a backward pass, our team, led by the defensive line, should compress the effective playing space. The defenders should do this in a way that allows them to react and be ready to cover the space behind them at any moment. It's very important that they maintain a low center of gravity and move in a manner that allows them to quickly transition to a side-on position, enabling faster pivoting and the expansion of the effective playing space. When the opponent with the ball is facing our goal and is not under pressure from our players, our defensive line should be prepared for the threat and be ready for dropping back the entire line. The support of the defensive line is crucial from the midfielders, whose dropping positions prepare them to collect the second ball. Equally important as managing the pushing forward or dropping back of the entire line is the ability to make decisions about one player stepping out of the line. In my defending philosophy, there is room for the development of players in defending between the lines. I have established a principle that every defender should be ready to step out of the line and defend in the space between them at any moment. A key factor influencing the decision to step out is the opponent's body positioning in a closed stance. A defender intending to step out into space should observe this body positioning even before the opponent receives the ball. Particularly, those opponents who move from an initial position into the space between the lines and operate there consistently should be marked by our player. In situations where the opponent moves into this space in the manner proposed by Mikel Arteta and is able to receive the ball in an open or semi-open position, our players should hold back from stepping out to intercept the ball. This is because the opponent running towards the ball might change direction with a single touch and evade our player. However, defenders should only hold back from stepping out to the opponent with the ball up to the point where the opponent can take a shot at our goal. In my defending philosophy, this point is the arc of the penalty area. The remaining players should drop back to provide cover for the actions of the teammate who is delaying the opponent. Moving on to the actions of delaying and blocking an opponent with the ball, I'd like to revisit the height of the penalty area arc. This is the height that divides the area in front of the penalty box into two zones, the delaying zone and the blocking zone. As I mentioned earlier, I try to make players aware of spatial references based on the lines of the field. In my concept of play, the penalty area arc marks the height up to which players are tasked with delaying the opponent's actions. However, if the opponent breaches the area around 18 meters from our goal, my players must be ready to block any shots on the goal. The elements I previously mentioned when describing one-on-one defensive play, such as lowering the center of gravity and moving with small steps alongside the player with the ball, are crucial in blocking the opponent. When blocking shots on goal, the role of supporting players is also very important. His cooperation with the goalkeeper allows for proper positioning in the penalty area and covering significant portions of the goal, enabling the goalkeeper to focus only on the space through which the ball could realistically pass. Now, I will discuss how my team is tasked with defending the penalty area. I will outline the different spaces into which I divide the process of defending the penalty area, but I will point out that one of these zones includes the half spaces. Therefore, securing these half spaces is a critical part of defending the penalty area. In the presented model, I will refer to formations that use 4 defenders. In my concept of play, half spaces can be secured in 3 ways depending on whether our team is playing with 1 or 2 number 6. When our team is competing in a 1-4-2-3-1 formation where we have 2 6, the responsibility for securing the half spaces is divided between the 2 central midfielders, with each taking one side. The situation becomes a bit more complex when we opt to play with 1 6, such as in a 1-4-3-3 formation. In this case, the lone central midfielder can be responsible for covering the half spaces, but the risk arises when the opponent switches play and moves the ball to the other corridor. The single central midfielder may not have the time or physical ability to cover the second half space in one play, requiring alternative solutions. One solution might be assigning this role to another central midfielder, for example an 8. However, I'm a proponent of a solution I learned from observing teams coached by the Portuguese manager Gonçalo Feio. In his defending philosophy, the central midfielder, typically a 6, would drop into the space between the central defenders, pushing them into half spaces and thus creating a 5-man defensive line. In this setup, the responsibility for covering the half spaces fell on the central defenders. I see 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages in this solution. The first advantage is that it doesn't place excessive physical demands on players responsible for covering the half spaces when the opponent switches play to the other side of the field. The second advantage is the increased freedom for the central defender to leave his position and engage directly on one-on-one duels in the wide area of the field, which is particularly beneficial when the 6 takes on the role of a central defender. However, the downside of this solution is the complexity of filling the space between the defenders by the central midfielder. It's crucial to avoid situations that I call defensive rotation, which is when the center back leaves his position too early before it's taken over by the central midfielder. In such cases, a pass by the opponent into the half space might result in the midfielder chasing the ball rather than attacking it heads-on. Therefore, when teaching this process to my players, I emphasize that the central midfielder should first occupy the position and only then can the center back leave it. It's also very important to define the moments when the central midfielder drops back, because if he does it too early, he vacates the space between the lines and make it easier for the opponents to receive the ball. The second disadvantage of this solution is the necessity for the 6 to have specific physical attributes that allow him to compete effectively in aerial duels at the near post during a cross. It is the 6 who will be responsible for this area if we decide to implement the described space coverage solution. In the presented models, I didn't choose to place the team in a structure based on 3 defenders. In this structure, there are always half left and half right center backs, and it is they who are responsible for covering the half spaces when I decide to play in such a system. Now, I will discuss the zones that are most important to me in the process of defending the penalty area and the way they should be filled. I distinguish 4 zones where the entire process takes place, and I believe that proper management of these zones allows for effective defense against the opponent's attack. The first of these zones is the blocking zone. It is assigned to the fullback, who is responsible for blocking the ball from being crossed into the penalty area, and the winger, who supports his partner with covering actions above the line of the ball in the center of play. The next area relates to the half spaces, which I have already discussed. Managing them can be entrusted to a midfielder or defender, depending on the structure we are playing in and who we designate for this task. Another area I define is the goal space. In this zone operates the so-called first line, consisting of 3 players. The last area is the second ball collection zone, where the tasks are carried out by the second line, consisting of at least 2 players. In my game concept, the minimum structure I want to use to defend the goal space during a cross into the penalty area is a 3+2 formation, which is 2 lines of 5 players. The entire process of defending the penalty area is carried out by my team in a zonal manner, which requires strict adherence to a clearly defined hierarchy of actions. A key role is played by the position of the ball, which determines how far into the penalty area my players should move. To provide the right spatial reference, we point out to the players the maximum points they should reach when the ball is near the end line. Following the philosophy of coach Maurizio Sarri all 5 defending players in the 3+2 structure must be positioned in the goal area. The final point for the player at the near post is the center of the space between the goal line and the penalty area line. The player centrally positioned in the first line will be set on the penalty area line exactly in the center of the goal. Meanwhile, the player defending at the far post will position himself in the center of the space between the penalty area line and the 11-meter mark. This arrangement of the first line creates a diagonal layout, allowing the goalkeeper to effectively intervene in the central part of the goal area and the area at the far post. The players in the second line also position themselves in a diagonal formation, filling the spaces between the players in the first line and are positioned a few meters higher. The player on the ball side takes a position in the center of the space between the penalty area line and the 11-meter mark, while his partner positions himself close by. If there is no need to involve an additional player to cover the half space, the winger on the opposite side of the ball should support the second line players by moving into the penalty area. In this setup, a 3+2+1 structure is created. When additional support is needed to cover the half space from another central midfielder, the winger on the other side should occupy the zone near the 11-meter mark and join the 3+2 structure. This type of player positioning is based on the principle of prioritizing support for teammates over individual marking of opponents in the penalty area. However, I believe that individual marking should occur in the final phase of defending the cross. This means that after occupying the appropriate zones, the defending players should take up positions that allow them to analyze the space and locate the nearest opponent. Then, just before the cross, they should closely mark the opponent, engaging in individual battles for the ball in the air. In the final part of the discussion on my team's functional organization, I would like to present an additional action that supports defensive performance. This action concerns the natural shoulder rotation. I have observed that some players, especially those playing at a lower competitive level or those who have not undergone proper football education and lack sufficient experience, rotate their body position in an unnatural way when returning to actions behind their backs. The first case illustrates a situation where an opponent with the ball passes it in the air behind the player in question. Since the action takes place on the opposite side of the field, this player is positioned sideways, facing the opponent to be able to observe him. After the opponent executes the pass, the ball passes the player, who should start running, turning over the shoulder on the side from which the pass was made. This way of body rotation is natural, but results in a temporary loss of visual control over the ball. I have often observed situations where players, fearing the loss of visual contact with the ball, choose to follow it with their eyes and turn their body in an unnatural way. This caused delays in starting the run and ultimately resulted in losing the positional race. Therefore, in the training process, I focus on how players turn and always suggest the natural method, which allows for quicker transition to subsequent actions. In the second model, we see a situation where two opponents intend to execute a 1-2 pass. The situation occurs quite low on the field, so there is a threat of direct impact on the defending team's penalty area. Therefore, the defender's actions should guide the opponent towards the sideline, closing off his ability to bring the ball into central zones. Imagine that the defending player has made the described approach, assuming the correct body position. Despite this, he has not managed to prevent the pass to the partner, and the opponent makes a move suggesting a desire to receive the ball back. In my defending philosophy, the slowing and direction-changing defender should start moving to lower his position without changing his body positioning. That means momentarily losing visual contact with the ball. His main goal should be to quickly win the position against the opponent, who wants to receive the ball again. If after slowing down, the defender decides to turn towards the ball receiving opponent in the central sector and then start running, trying to win the position against the opponent entering the space, his actions will be delayed and ineffective. I have now finished presenting the functional organization of my team in defense. I will now proceed to discuss the structural organization. As I mentioned earlier, throughout the season, my team often defends in various structures. I am a proponent of a more strategic approach in defense than in attack, where I am a strong advocate of tactical dimension. It often happens that my team plays in a 1-4-2-3-1 structure. This is a very clear structure with many advantages. For example, it allows for the use of 3 players in the central sector of the field, implements structural marking against teams playing in a 1-4-3-3 formation, and is simple to teach to teams that use half spaces in their training process. Despite this, my game philosophy predominantly favors 3 other structures: the educational 1-4-4-2, the main 1-4-3-3, and the alternative 1-3-4-3. In the material where I discuss my attacking philosophy, I have presented the 1-4-4-2 structure in a less favorable light. It's true that I don't like proposing it to my team, and I don't like defending in it for the reasons mentioned in the attacking philosophy. However, for the same reasons I don't like defending in it, I enjoy teaching players how to attack using it. Therefore, not wanting to waste time, I apply myself to implementing it with the same level of focus and respect as my preferred structures. Key factors in favor of using it, mainly for the development of offensive actions, are easily definable spaces, a structure composed of vertical and horizontal lines, and the compatibility of the structure and zones with the definition of the training field. The square structure is a tool for developing offensive actions. My preferred structure from which I start developing the defensive approach is 1-4-3-3. The main reason I favor this formation is because it has 3 central midfielders and 3 forwards. Additionally, this structure allows for a smooth transition to a 5-defender line by positioning the holding midfielder between the central defenders. This adjustment impacts the effectiveness of half-space coverage. Moreover, this structure also facilitates a smooth transition to the 1-4-4-2 diamond formation, which I prefer to use when the opponent starts the game with a goal kick. This formation also allows for effective competition against opponents, whether they use a 4-man or 3-man defensive line. The last dominant structure in my game philosophy is 1-3-4-3. Its advantage is having 3 forwards who can apply pressure directly even if the opponent plays with 3 central defenders. Additionally, this structure provides a bit more balance as the midfield line covers more horizontal space. The presence of wingbacks also allows for various types of marking in the central sector of the field: zonal, structural, mixed, or even individual. Playing with 3 central defenders also simplifies defining and adhering to player roles in half spaces and reference areas in the penalty area during crosses. The centrally positioned central defender in this system often has good physical attributes and is ideal for contesting aerial duels close to the near post. Similar to the 1-4-3-3 formation, the 1-3-4-3 formation can also be easily transformed into a 1-4-4-2 diamond, positively impacting the ability to effectively respond when the opponent starts the game with a goal kick. I would now like to take a moment to discuss the structural fluidity of the dominant game systems in my philosophy. In other words, I will now present how to modify game structures to achieve a final structure for each sub-moment of the game in which my team is defending. In my training process, I distinguish 5 sub-moments of the game for which I define the positioning and functioning of the team. The first is when the opponent starts play from the goal. That means a goal kick. The next sub-moments are high, medium, and low defensive zones. High defensive zone refers to pressing, when the opponent builds an attack from the back. Low defensive zone concerns preventing the opponent from bringing the ball into the penalty area. The last sub-moment is defending the penalty area. Although I distinguish 5 sub-moments of the game, the medium defensive zone is a specific sub-moment for me. I consider it and I include it in the division, but don't see it as crucial for my team's actions. I believe that a team intending to defend aggressively and regain the ball must act high up the field immediately after the opponent restarts play. If the opponent has high quality, they might handle the pressure, advance the ball to our half and possibly even into our penalty area. This advancement occurs through the medium zone but happens very quickly due to the actions of escaping pressure. Our team, applying pressure, immediately transitions to preventing the ball from entering the penalty area without functioning longer in the medium zone. I don't claim that football teams don't operate in the medium zone while defending, but I believe that a team choosing this approach cannot apply aggressive pressure. Such a team defends passively, and my team doesn't fall into this category. Therefore, the medium zone serves in my training process only to visually demonstrate to players the base structure so that each of them knows their position and role. Trends in football change. There was a time when coaches organized play solely through formations. Some time ago, structures became less popular and everyone began to focus on player functions. There are coaches who claim that the formation is irrelevant because it is just numbers like a phone number. However, functional organization doesn't exist without a base formation which provides the team with order and structure. The formation itself will not be effective if it is not filled with the appropriate functions. This can be compared to the body and the soul. The body is the structure of a person, but for it to be alive, it needs the soul. Every football structure can quickly become distorted depending on the role a player performs in a given position. Even a player's profile can affect the anomalies in the structure. For example, imagine a 1-4-4-2 formation where one of central midfielders has a 6 profile and the other has a 10 profile. Automatically the formation will distort towards a 1-4-4-2 diamond. If we also assign specific functions to players, such as having the 10 profile midfielder support the forwards during the opponent's restart and the 6 profile midfielder balance the structure, we get an even clearer diamond structure. It should be noted that what we see on video is a result based on the model of play. The idea we present to players in the locker room is based on the game philosophy. If these two definitions are mixed up and not understood, it can lead to a breakdown in communication with the team and organizational chaos. As we see from the presented pitch models, every structure can be easily transformed into the final 1-4-4-2 diamond system by using the appropriate profiles and functions. This is how my team tries to regain possession from the opponent when they restart with a goal kick. We could achieve the same final structure by deploying players with the right profiles and defining their functions in the high zone. However, in this sub-moment of the game, I prefer using the proper structure, namely 1-4-3-3. To achieve this structure, modifying the 1-4-4-2 in the line, you need to place players with an 8 profile in the wide midfield positions. One of the central midfielders should have a 6 profile and the other should be a 10 or a 9. For the forward positions, you should deploy wingers. To modify the alternative 1-3-4-3 structure to the desired 1-4-3-3, you need to introduce a 6 profile midfielder into the central defense, replace the wingbacks with fullbacks and position a 9 profile forward in the attacking midfielder role. Moving to the lone zone, where we try to prevent the ball from entering our penalty area, we can see the ease of transitioning to a 5 defender line in any formation. However, transitioning from the 1-4-4-2 system is much easier to a structure based on 3 midfielders and 2 forwards than to one based on 2 midfielders and 3 forwards. Since I prefer competing with a structure of 2 midfielders and 3 forwards in the low zone, I define the structural fluidity of this submoment at a lower level. As we see in the final model concerning defending the penalty area, each of the dominant structures in my training process is easily modifiable and can form the final structure where one player is responsible for the wide corridor, another for the half space, 3 players in the first line and 2 in the second line to protect the goal area in a 3+2 setup, supported by an additional player on the opposite side of the ball. Additionally, there is one player performing coverage above the ball line and a forward waiting for actions after regaining possession. As observed, this final structure is achieved through specific approaches to defending in the low zone. In this section of the presentation, I would like to focus on a more detailed discussion of defending in a specific structure, the profiles of players in it, and their functions in the team. What does defending mean to me? Defending is, in my view, an attempt to take away the opponent's ability to control the game. Unlike many football coaches, I am a proponent of the view that control of the game can only be achieved through ball possession. Therefore, regaining possession from the opponent equals, in my logic, taking away its ability to control the game and gaining control of the competition. In my defending philosophy, there are 2 approaches to regaining control of the competition. The first is an offensive approach, referring to applying pressure to regain possession. This is primarily carried out in the submoment of the opponent restarting play with a goal kick and in the high zone. The second approach, defensive, refers to preventing the ball from entering the penalty area and is mainly carried out in the low zone and during penalty area defense. Presenting the structural functional organization using players with the appropriate profiles allows us to answer questions about applying pressure on the opponent and preventing the ball from entering the penalty area. The question, how many times did the opponent pass the ball within our structure during one action, helps to verify the effectiveness of our actions in the offensive approach. The question, how many times did the opponent enter our penalty area, indicates how effectively the team functions in the defensive approach. The ultimate success of a given structure depends on the player's execution of their assigned functions, which is related to trust in the accurate definition of their profiles. For better communication with players, quicker learning and evaluation of actions and their effectiveness, it's crucial to define the spaces in which specific actions are carried out. In my defending philosophy, I distinguish 10 such spaces. These are presented in the model of defending in the opponent's half. However, these spaces are mobile and not assigned to specific areas of the football field. They are redefined as the effective playing space determined by both teams' changes. These spaces are the base zone, the initiation zone, the chasing zone, 2 continuation zones, 3 corridor zones, and 2 half spaces. As the name suggests, the initiation zone is used by our players to start applying pressure on the player with the ball. As a result of the pressure, the ball is often directed towards the central sector of the field, where the central defender usually moves the ball into the chasing zone. In this zone, an attempt is made to intercept the ball or apply pressure on the opponent receiving it in a closed position. If the ball ends up in the side sector, which I define as the continuation zone of the pressure, the opponent's fullback may decide to progress by passing to a partner positions between our defenders and midfielders. In such a case, our defenders will need to step out of line to engage in one-on-one duel in one of 3 areas: the central corridor, the half space, or the wide corridor. However, if the opponent's fullback opts to pass the ball back to the goalkeeper, who might then switch the play, our player, continuing the pressure, will need to run to the base zone. The most desired outcome of applying pressure on the opposing players is winning the ball. However, applying pressure can also lead to less desirable outcomes, such as a foul committed by one of our players, the ball being kicked out of play by the opponent, or a pass by the opponent in the air, which may result in a need to contest the ball in an individual duel. During game analysis, it's valuable to document where pressure-related actions took place, whether they were successful, and how they were ultimately resolved. This information helps indicate the direction for team development in the context of defending. Now, we will connect three key factors: the base structure, player profiles, and the functions specified for each to determine how my team most frequently defends. When the opponent starts the play from the goal kick, my team is positioned in a 1-4-4-2 diamond structure. I want the wingers in the first line to apply pressure on the central defender, who receives the ball from the goalkeeper, running directly at him. Despite the lack of circular runs, the 1-4-4-2 diamond structure positions the two players in the first line very narrowly. Their actions, even if performed directly, guide the opponent towards the continuation zone of the pressure. The player supporting the pressure exerted by the winger within the central sector is the striker. The final position of the striker should be observed by the second winger to support him in closing the central sector, but I will address this shortly. On the side of the pressing winger, one of the central midfielders, in this case the number 10, performs balancing actions. However, as shown in the graphic, there is no player to his left closing the diamond structure. Therefore, it is necessary to determine who is responsible for continuing the pressure when the ball moves to the side sector of the field. In my defending philosophy for the opponent's goal kick, the responsibility for continuing the pressure can fall to either the winger or the central midfielder. The decision depends on the position of the opponent's fullback. If the fullback receives the ball low enough to be within the winger's range of action, the winger will continue the pressure. If the pass bypasses the winger to the extent that he can only chase the opponent, then the central midfielder should take on the responsibility of applying pressure. Assigning the central midfielder is safer because by moving towards the fullback, he follows the line of the pass, closing it off. Observing changes in position and role on the field, his teammates adjust their positions so that the central midfielder with a 6 profile can cover the higher space, providing support. The striker drops his position to close the central sector, and the winger on the ball side applies pressure on the player with the ball, executing the actions outlined in the principle of balance.
Jamendo.com.
The method of action to regain possession in the high zone is almost identical to that during the goal kick. However, there are two differences. The first is that the base structure is no longer 1-4-4-2 in a diamond, but 1-4-3-3. The second relates to the preferred zone for regaining possession, which in the high zone corresponds to the chasing zone. Again, the initial pressure is applied by one of the wingers. He applies pressure by running directly at the opponent. Being part of a line of 3 rather than 2 players affects the position from which he starts his actions. Positioned slightly wider, he is able to direct the opponent's actions related to progressing the ball into the central area of the field. If the ball moves into the chasing zone, the opponent receiving the ball in the central sector will have to deal with the challenge of operating in a closed position. By passing the ball to the fullback, my team must again redefine the player responsible for applying pressure. As before, it will be either the winger or the central midfielder, here with number 8. However, it may happen that the central defender, trying to avoid pressure from the winger, passes the ball back to the goalkeeper. In such a situation, the winger should continue the pressure, running to close off the return pass line to the central defender. Many teams facing opponents who apply aggressive pressure look for solutions to modify their build-up play. One such solution is the fluid transition to creating a three-man defensive line. This is one of the reasons why the 1-4-3-3 structure is my favorite. It allows for continuing pressure actions in the same manner without requiring changes. In situations where the opponent opts to modify their structure in this way by delivering the ball to a centrally positioned defender in the line, the responsibility for applying pressure on him falls to our striker.
Jamendo.com.
Another potential scenario when defending in the opponent's half involves creating a second six. I want to mention how my team protects against diagonal passes to the opponent. The key action in closing off access to the central area of the field is adjusting the position of the winger on the opposite side to match the position of the striker supporting the winger. Of course, the central midfielder on the opposite side of the ball should also be vigilant. It's important to remember that these actions fall within zonal marking, not individual marking. This means that the control of the opponent is focused on securing the area and eliminating the possibility of progression by pass in that area.
Jamendo.com.
The penultimate scenario concerning defending in the opponent's half relates to situations where the opponent escapes our pressure and switches the play to the opposite corridor. In such a situation, the player starting actions to block the opponent's fullback is primarily the central midfielder, who positioned himself on the opposite side of the ball 2 actions earlier. The player applying pressure above the line of the ball is also the winger, who quickly returns to the newly created center of play. However, he will likely find it difficult to reach a position to apply frontal pressure on the opponent, so the only rational choice in this situation is the central midfielder. The general principle for my team when the opponent escapes pressure and starts actions in the second corridor of the field defines the necessity of actions contrary to those used at the beginning of the action. I want my players to close off the opponent, directing him to the line, even if it involves the risk of temporary progression by the opponent. I believe that by utilizing the central midfielder, the returning winger and the still ready fullback, we can end the opponent's attack in balance or numerical superiority in the wide sector of the field, even if the opponent ultimately gains a few meters. It might seem odd that the main principle is not to get all players back behind the ball line as quickly as possible, but to push the opponent in a frontal direction. However, I believe that despite the greater risk, this action allows for a quicker disruption of the opponent's attack and the chance to rest after a failed pressure attempt. If I notice a problem with the effectiveness of this approach, I opt for an alternative principle of getting all players back behind the ball line. In this case, I allow the opponent to start building play from scratch, and my team is required to begin applying pressure anew in the same action, but with all players positioned behind the ball line.
Jamendo.com.
The final issue I want to address is defending between the lines, particularly between the defensive line and the midfield line of my team. A crucial action in my defending philosophy is for defenders to step out of the line to apply pressure on an opponent receiving the ball in open space. A defender who decides to step out must be confident that the nearest opponent will not be able to bypass him by dribbling the ball during the reception. Therefore, the decision to step out of the line should be preceded by an analysis of the entire situation, with a particular focus on the opponent's body position. The most favorable situation for the defender stepping out is when the opponent receives the ball in his proximity and in a close position. Two closest teammates should provide cover, while the furthest player in the line should adjust his position to match the nearest partner, providing cover. When the opponent approaches our half and there is a real threat of direct impact on our penalty area, my team undergoes a structural reorganization and shifts to defending with a 5-man backline. The 1-4-3-3 structure includes one central midfielder with a 6 profile, so the simplest way to make this reorganization is to place him between the two central defenders. The wingers then become wide midfielders, enabling the transition to a 1-5-4-1 system as illustrated in the diagram. The next diagram shows a situation where my team designates one of the defenders from the line to apply pressure on the opponent. However, this situation is different because the team is already operating with 5 defenders and the entire action takes place on our half. It is important to remember that a defender in the line who decides to step out too late or when the opponent with the ball is already facing our goal may fail to prevent a direct shot on our goal or the execution of the final pass into the penalty area. Defending in the low zone, in my philosophy, focuses on preventing opponents from getting the ball into the penalty area. I particularly want to limit the possibility of delivering the ball into the penalty area through the final pass. Therefore, I prefer to direct the opponent's actions outside my team's structure to the wide corridors of the field. By having a defensive line of 5 players and a midfield line of 4, my team can compete in the wide sector of the field with at least 2 players. If we add the central defender responsible for the half space, we are often able to compete with a numerical advantage, making it difficult for the opponent to penetrate our defense. I have already discussed defending the penalty area in another part of the presentation. For this phase of the game, I distinguish 4 zones: the blocking zone, the cover zone, the goal zone, and the second ball zone. In my philosophy, the responsibility for preventing the ball from entering the penalty area lies with the fullback operating in the blocking zone. He is supported by the winger staying behind the ball line in the center of the play and one of the central defenders who offers support in the cover zone. In the goal zone there are 3 players. The 6 profile central midfielder is positioned near the near post. The second central defender is located in the center of the goal and the second fullback is positioned near the far post. Actions in the second ball zone are handled by the central midfielders with 8 and 10 profiles. Their actions are supported by the winger playing on the opposite side of the ball. If there is a need for one of the central midfielders to support the partner's actions in the cover zone, the winger joins the 3+2 structure. In this configuration, the striker is responsible for actions related to the principle of defensive unity. The first line of players is characterized by a diagonal arrangement, so the area behind the central defender and the fullback playing on the opposite side of the ball is managed by the goalkeeper. In my defending philosophy, there is a rule regarding clearing the ball when it reaches our penalty area. My players aim to avoid situations where they clear the ball in front of our penalty area, as this could result in the opponent collecting it and taking a shot on our goal. Therefore, we divide the penalty area into 2 zones using a line we call the central line. If the ball is cleared from the zone in front of the central line, the direction of the clearance should follow the side from which the ball was passed. If the ball reaches beyond the central line, we aim to extend the trajectory it is traveling on and clear it out of the penalty area in the direction opposite to the passer. The last scenario I will present concerns regaining lost space. This refers to pushing the opponent away from our penalty area as far as possible. When the ball is in the wide corridor, the responsibility for applying pressure falls on the fullback. He tries to direct the opponent toward the sideline, and if there is no possibility for progression, the opponent may pass the ball back to a deeper positioned teammate. When the opponent makes a back pass, my players should move forward, gaining a few meters of space. Aggressive pressure on the opponent with the ball occurs when the ball reaches a player in the defensive line opposite the side where the ball is. At this point, the pressure is most intense and my striker takes the initiative.
Jamendo.com.
Summarizing the structural functional organization, I'd like to mention the player profiles. The only specific profile during the defensive phase relates to the central midfielder playing in front of the defensive line. This is the only position that requires a specific player profile to facilitate the effective transition from a 1-4-3-3 system to a 1-5-4-1. The most important characteristic of this profile is the physical ability to compete effectively in aerial duels in the area near the near post during crosses. The next topic I will discuss is the transition to attacking after regaining possession of the ball. In my training process, I identified three basic spaces for the team's transition to attack. The first of these is located in the central sector of the field. The ball is recovered through interception in the chasing zone. The player regaining the ball should already be able to generate the necessary speed through preparatory actions. This is the moment when our team wants to attack the opponent directly. The second space is in the continuation zone. Similar to before, the player recovering the ball performs actions at the speed generated while closing down the opponent. In this space, we also aim to attack the opponent directly. The last space refers to the area between the opponent's defensive and midfield lines. This is the space where the ball ends up as a result of the opponent winning an aerial duel when our team unsuccessfully attempts a direct attack with a pass behind the opponent's line. A key ability for my team's midfielders is tracking the ball and positioning themselves to collect the second ball. In this scenario, the attack is also executed directly on the opponent's goal after regaining possession. Here is an improved version of the division of player functions in the context of attacking and maintaining possession. I will now divide the players into specific roles. I identify 5 roles in situations where my team applies the principle of direct attack after regaining possession. The task of the player regaining the ball is to look for opportunities to progress with a pass or dribble. Therefore, the role of the players above the line of the ball and its immediate vicinity is crucial, as they must find space and create a passing lane to support progression on the field. The group furthest from the ball above its line prepares for finishing actions. This means that at the moment of regaining possession, they prepare a position they will occupy 2 actions after this process. Their behavior is part of the principle of offensive unity. Players positioned in this area horizontally are tasked with creating a passing line if there is a need to shift the ball to another sector of the field. The last group, also the furthest from the ball, but below its line, consists of defenders whose task is to immediately reduce space and locate opponents for marking during the attack.
Jamendo.com.
The exact same functions apply in a situation where the team is unable to attack directly and must carry out the attack in another area. The only difference is that the support for progression is provided by the players furthest from the recovery zone above the ball line, while those who were close to the event prepare a position for finalizing actions for the next phase. In a scenario where the team cannot progress either directly or indirectly, the alternative rule dictates the need to maintain possession. The role of the player regaining the ball remains to seek space, while partners in the area close to the center of play below the ball line provide support for moving the ball. The group furthest from the ball below its line should in such a situation increase the effective playing space to facilitate easier ball distribution. The actions of the player groups furthest from the center of play above the ball line are focused on providing support to maintain possession in the next action after the ball is moved out of the recovery zone and preparing to enter a positional attack. Thank you very much for your time. This was my defending philosophy. Tomasz Tchórz.